Okay, so welcome everyone to our product management showcase event in collaboration with Minnow. So Minnow currently offers a 4-week course on strategy and structured problem solving for product people, featuring brilliant product leaders from Canva, Atlassian, and more. My name is Sharon, the General Manager for Textbook Ventures this year, and today I'm super excited to be talking to 3 incredible PMs in the space. So first we have Harry Hamilton, who is a PM at Safetyculture and the founder of Minnow. We have Sophia Witherington, who is a PM at Canva and previously the head of fellowship at StartMate, Australia's most successful accelerator. And lastly, we have Faiza Harji, who is a PM at Google and previously a PM at Zipco. So in today's session, we'll be diving into, PM fundamentals, developing a product sense, and any advice for aspiring PMs and founders. Towards the end of the event, we will have a short Q&A session with the Slido link below if you have any questions you would like to ask our panel. So to start off with a really fun question, when was the last time that you shipped something? It could be in anything and in any context. So we might start off with Sophia, and then we'll go to Faiza and then Harry.
I have such a disappointing answer here. Basically, so for context, I've come from StartMate where, I joined when there's 3 people, and then I joined Canva and there's over 3,000 people. And the thing that I shipped, I wouldn't even call it shipping today, was there was this out-of-date Google form sitting on the website. And do you know how impossible it was to find out who the right person was to then go and get this change, and the hoops I had to jump through to get it done? But the satisfaction that I got from actually getting it changed, like the saddest, smallest thing, but you've got to take the wins, big or small.
Sure, wow.
Awesome. Well, yeah, you shipped it. That's the most important. I think for me, I just recently joined Google about 6 weeks ago, and part of our onboarding process is this project where you're assigned sort of 3 engineers, a UX person, and a PM, and you're asked to sort of build something that's production ready on the Google stack. And so we actually built this internal product feature where, given that Google's kind of big and all over the world, often you know people from a past life, but you don't know they actually work here or in a different city or team. And so we built like a recommended friend feature for internal people to use. And in just under 2 weeks, we had a demoable feature that was production ready, which was pretty fun and exciting, and a great way to sort of start and launch into a new career.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've got a bit of a funny one. This was actually a Minnow, feature product, not a Safetyculture one, but last night I actually finished building the first iteration of Minnow's speaker library. So effectively like an on-demand video content library with about 9 hours of awesome product speakers talking about things like growth and experimentation. So yeah, a bit of a different experience actually, quote unquote, building the thing rather than working with much smarter engineers and designers than me to build a thing. But yeah, finished that up last night. So yeah, maybe we can organize to share that around after this.
Yeah, super keen for that. So Harry, to break down the space, product management still carries a real sense of mystery, but what exactly does the role of a product manager entail?
Good question. I think most of us are probably still trying to figure that out even once you land in the role. It's fair, right? Because product management looks so different, even depending on the company you're in and the product that you're working on, but it's typically driven by size. So a really large company is going to look quite different from a very small startup, and a really mature product is going to look quite different from a brand new 0 to 1 product if you're sitting in the PM chair. So it will mean many things to many different people. So I know that's not helpful, but in simple terms, really, I think what it is, your job is to create value for customers. So help the customers that you care about solve their most important problems, and do so in a way that creates business value. So usually that's going to mean something like revenue or profitability or user growth. And that's it in its simplest terms. But if you dig a little bit deeper, usually what that means is you're going to be working with a team of engineers and designers, what you might hear called sort of the triad, and working with that team to discover customer problems, ideate, come up with how you might tackle those, through to actually developing, building, shipping, and iterating typically software products. So you're working with this team super closely. That is the product team, but you as the product manager, your job mostly, or you're going to over index on the why. So why what it is you're building, or why those problems you're solving are important, and how they align back to the business. You're going to think a lot about the who. So who are the customers you care about? Who are the ones that you don't so much? And which problems of your customers are actually the ones that you should go and tackle? And then, you know, the third sort of part of your job is working with your team on the how. And I think, you know, a misconception people have sometimes is the product manager comes up with the how. That's almost always not true, and it shouldn't be true. But rather your job should be facilitating how you're going to go and solve that problem, but really leaning on the perspectives of engineering and design to go and work out how you're going to do that. But yeah, simple terms, solve the customer problem, create business value.
Yeah, wonderful. I think that's a very comprehensive answer. And I think it's really interesting to sort of really unpack each of your, you know, different career paths into PM and your journey and actions that you did take to really land a PM role. So Faiza, would you like to start off with this one?
Yeah, sure. So I guess for a bit of context, I come from sort of a corporate strategy consulting background, did an undergrad in business and was in Canada, and really when I was, you know, going to school, product really wasn't even a career. It was like you go into investment banking, consulting, accounting, or marketing, and those were kind of your only options. And so I didn't really know it even existed, and then I kind of moved to Australia, and after that, you know, tech was really having a moment, and so how I got into PM was actually just doing a lot of my own research. You know, there's so much content out there around, you know, what people do after consulting or what other jobs are out there. So I did my research. I understood what I wanted to do, so what PM was and what transferable skills. And so I actually figured out, you know, what I wanted to do, and most importantly, why. So being in consulting, you know, you're quite familiar with the what, but you're not really close to the end user. And so a lot of your impact of your work, you don't necessarily get to see firsthand. And that was a big reason why I wanted to pivot into product. And then in terms of the actions I took, I think that was mentioned at the beginning of this call, I built my network. I cold called people a lot on LinkedIn. I went to a bunch of meetups. And the first in-person meetup that I went to, my subsequent boss was actually on the panel. And I got the job from actually just going and talking to him after a panel and saying, you know, this is who I am, this is what experience I have, and this is why I think you should kind of, you know, hire me into a product role. And that's kind of where my product journey really started.
Wow, yeah, that's a very serendipitous sort of, happening there. That's really great to hear. Sophia, would you like to share your story?
I'm going to caveat this by saying, I guess first of all, which we'll see across all is like there is no career path. Like someone on Slack the other day was like, all PMs jump in thread of like what degree you did, and there was honestly everything from like architecture to sustainability to computer science to I did psychology, like such a mix. And then the phrase that I love the most, and I always I feel like I say it like on a weekly basis when it comes to careers and also life in general, is the number of lives that you can live in this lifetime is limitless. And so I view myself as having like 4 different career chapters up until this point, which feel maybe a little bit separate, but the sum of the parts kind of equal the whole. But I just, for background on kind of how I ended up here, which feels all surreal to me. Wouldn't have guessed I'd be here a year prior, but I studied psychology of business, started my career in business ops and HR, moved to London, started working with, then this is the next chapter, working with private equity funds on kind of pre-deal assessment, largely related to like board capability, exec teams. I moved to Australia and thought I would kind of do the same thing and figured it didn't really exist. Came across kind of tech and startups and VC, and as far as I said, kind of moving at that point where tech was kind of having a moment. Like there was a sense of, you know, there's interesting activity, there's interesting companies coming through. Oh, and by the way, like they're a much better place to work than like, you know, corporate London style of environments where I was wearing, you know, suits and heels to work every day and you know, only could talk when I'm spoken to. And I came across startups and VC and was like, I know that this is where I want to be. So we're going to mention this, I'm sure, a lot more during this call, but I made a list of like all the funds, all the tech companies, and cold outreach. I must have sent literally over like, oh, I don't even know, like 400 messages to like everyone being like, this is what I've done. This is kind of what I'm interested in. This is why I think you're cool and interesting. Please, can you meet me for coffee? I want to learn. And you know, eventually you knock on enough doors and some of them open, and then one door connects to another door. And yeah, and I kind of spent the past, I've been in previous 2 jobs before Canva now in Australia, but I feel like I've spent the past 4 years just knocking on doors. And how that's then led into Canva is like, you're going to be constantly problem solving and figuring out who the right person is to help you, because you're, you know, the beauty of being somewhere like Canva or wherever it is you're very rarely the smartest person in the room. And so how can you go and find out who the right person is around you to help solve that problem? And so my advice here when it comes to, you know, if you want to take actions towards becoming a PM, first of all, there is no like one breed of PMs. They come like in wildly different backgrounds and also like leniencies in their skill sets. And so like cold outreach people, different types of companies, whether B2B or B2C, late stage, early stage, different PMs within that. Some are more data driven, some are more design led. Like there's, everyone will have their kind of spike. And so like figure out within all of that maybe where you sit on that spectrum. And actually like last thing, and sorry I'm rambling now, but go towards like what you, when you're listening to how people talk about what they do and what they're interested in, like lean into what is exciting and interesting to you versus what you necessarily are at the moment good at. And the difference is like you could be great at, I don't know, data, but actually like it drains your soul and you don't want to be doing that. Like actually the stuff that gets you going is like, you know, speaking to users or like experimenting or figuring out what that is. And so yeah, do cold outreach. It's great.
Yeah, wonderful. And Harry?
Yeah, I actually just picking up quickly on Sophia's point there around, you know, there are so many different profiles of PM. There's people that are, you know, came from a consulting background like myself and Faiza, psychology backgrounds. Some of the best PMs I know came from support backgrounds, but equally you have engineers that turn product. And as someone who's been lucky enough to be in a position hiring lots of PMs, when you're building a product team, you look for a mix of these people. So just as there's so many paths to come into product, you also want to represent each of those different profiles. So your quirkiness, your different path is actually a strength in many different cases. But for me, I'll be super quick. Similar sort of story to Faiza. Fun fact, we actually work together in consulting. But yeah, I was in consulting, really wanted to build something longer term, didn't know it was called product. Ended up speaking with a few folks at tech companies, met someone who had been very, very early on at Spotify and was then at Safetyculture. And there just so happened to be at Safetyculture an opportunity to try and build a new business from the ground up, which at the time was build a sensors Internet of Things business in a checklist app company. Which was sort of a core consulting strategy problem. So I started in work that was familiar to me in a tech company, and then over time transitioned and became a bit of a product person.
That's great to hear. So I think this really does lean into sort of our next question, which is sort of what separates good PMs from great PMs. Yeah, so Harry, would you like to kick this one off?
Yeah, I love this one. So many things come to mind. I think one of two things I'd throw in there that I think really separate good to great PMs. One is having, and they're related, but one is having a founder mindset. So actually, maybe they're just the same big point. But yeah, I think good PMs about their software product end to end. So they'll understand their funnel, their customers, qual and quant. But I think great PMs think like a business owner, and they understand that product or building product is just one of the levers available to you to help your customers and help the business. But often there's a whole bunch of other levers that sort of sit around your product that you can be thinking about to create value. So, you know, that might be, how do you help more customers find what you're building and the value you're creating top of funnel? How do you, you know, play around with your marketing channels or your partnerships? But the great PMs really stretch and blur the boundaries of what it means to own a product. So yeah, that's the one I'd throw in.
Yeah. Sophia, what about you?
I think that it's curiosity and boldness. And so you can talk about iterating and making incremental change. A lot of the time we can get inspiration from competitors, but actually how can you fundamentally make a difference, push boundaries, and actually reimagine how things are done versus just improve? And so I think that's a degree of like thoughtfulness. It's a degree of like actually like, how do you know that you can carve out time to think differently and actually not be afraid to shake things up? So yeah, curiosity and boldness.
Yeah, and Faiza, what would you say for that question?
Yeah, you know, a lot of the ones, I think I'd echo some of the same points, but really three things for me really differentiate sort of good to great PMs. One, as Sophia mentioned, the ability to be intellectually curious and never put yourself in a box. So as Harry mentioned, like I'm never the PM of this one thing. I think about the user and the business all the time, and I ask really good questions, and you're always willing to learn. I think, as I think Sophia mentioned as well, being in product, you're fortunately and sometimes unfortunately never the smartest person in the room, which means else around you knows a lot more than you do. But you have to be willing to ask good questions and the right questions at the right time, always. And so I think that's the first one. The second one I'd put here is the ability to strike the best balance between being an art and a science. Product is, as we kind of said, there's no career path, there's no degree, there's no, classification that now, yes, you are a product manager. It's being able to sort of understand where you need to flex your soft skills. So building really good relationships, influencing your stakeholders, organizing, planning, doing all those things, but balancing that with the right understanding of tech, competence, data, your scientist sort of mindset. And I think that's the best way that really great PMs know how to get things done in the right way. And then the last thing I'd add is communication. There's no such thing as sort of over communication in product. And I find the greatest PMs know how to ask the right questions, know what to do in terms of flexing the art and science, and then know how to communicate it to anyone who they need to in their product kind of world.
Yeah, I think that's really comprehensive. And I would love to ask you then the question that is, what does your PM workflow look like?
Yeah, I guess I can start. So I think product is a beautiful career in that you're kind of focusing at, a 5,000 feet view, a 10,000 feet view, and then sometimes like a 1 foot view of everything going on in your life. And so my workflow constant looks like a mix of, what am I doing now? So what features are in delivery? What's happening in production? Do we have an outage? And overseeing delivery. What's happening next? So you're also forced to think about, what's happening next in my team? What are they working on in the next month, in the next quarter? How am I managing, discovering that with sort of whatever's happening in the broader business, as well as later, which is, is this even aligned to our broader business strategy? Are we really providing value for the business? Are we making money? Is our strategic direction for the business as a whole changing? And I feel like not only do I switch between sort of that now, next layer, later in a day, but sometimes within the same meeting, in the same 5-minute conversation. And so the context switching for product is really real, but PMs have a great opportunity to see across all of that and make really good decisions all the time. So that's kind of what my workflow looks like, I guess.
Yeah, I'm curious to know whether that's similar to like Harry's and Sophia's workflow as well. So if you guys have anything to add to that one, yeah, keen to hear your workflows.
Yeah, I mean, I've been at Canva now 2 months, and I'm trying to really get the hang of this. So I think the context switching is very real. Like I said today, I was like, I feel like I'm being added to 10 new Slack channels a day of like new projects across the organization, the interdependencies, the the need to socialize ideas. There's a lot of that I view it as like you need to know kind of everything about everything, which means you know nothing about everything. And so how I manage that, I have my tools. Like I live by Notion and my calendar. They're kind of my main things that I just keep myself organized. I have to, because I'm context switching so much, and also I have I really struggle to concentrate. I have ADHD. Like, I have to write down everything. Otherwise I will not stay focused. I will not, like, and I won't remember a thing. I have memory of a sieve. And so yeah, I've just got to write everything down. I've got to like reflect on it, pull out my to-do list, and just like block out my calendar accordingly. And I think the other piece here is, because you're in so many meetings with different stakeholders, different groups, different interdependencies, you have to be very disciplined around blocking out focus time and actually being able to get your own work done, versus getting caught up in the meeting.
So yeah, if I jump in there, my one's probably going to be a little bit different, given I'm now currently in a group PM role. My product is more, I guess, the product teams rather than the product itself. So I'm sort of one step removed again. So, a lot of my workflow sort of sitting across or working with 5 of our product teams is, how can I help share the benefits or the learning that one team is doing into the other 4, right? So the thing that I care a lot about in my workflow is learning velocity. How are we all learning together really, really quickly? And then at the same time, just unblocking. So, where are we all trying to build the same thing, or all trying to solve a similar customer problem in a similar way that we could work on together rather than separately? So yeah, it's definitely a little bit of a shift when the teams become your product in a way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't really think too much about that context switching component, but that's really insightful to hear. So I think the next question that we have is, when looking at a PM role, how do you sort of differentiate between a product management role at an early stage startup in comparison to a big tech company such as Google? So yeah, I'll ask this one to Faiza.
Yeah, sure. So I guess a bit of context. Prior to Google, I was sort of in product at 2 companies prior. And so the first one was pre-IPO, and then I went public with them. The second one was post-IPO, but we went global. And so that was a big sort of startup scale-up problem. Like, we were really strong in Australia and the US, and we were expanding into new emerging markets. And I was the lead to expand us into sort of the Middle East and Africa. And then now being at Google, working on Google Maps, which is the most mature product and the most mature organization that I've worked on, but it is also still a global role. And I would say the things that sort of differentiate, I guess, my product role across those 3, when I was reflecting on this question, I kind of bucketed it into to 3 things. So one is really around, I guess, scope and ownership. When you're a team of, 20 people and you have resources are scarce, you're kind of doing everything, apart from coding. I don't have a computer science background. You were doing it all, right? You were querying the data, you were figuring out, you were doing the user interviews yourself, doing the usability testing, figuring out, how to prioritize this work, being the product owner, being the product manager, kind of being a half lawyer, being compliance. And then you're kind of saying, okay, release this into production. So you're really working across a lot of different, I guess, domains or functions, simply because you don't have a lot of people to do it, and you're trying to learn really quickly, really fast, validate your idea without wasting the least amount of money. Whereas as you start to get into more mature organizations that are post IPO or global in nature, I would say the need to do that end to end becomes a lot less, because you have the luxury of resources. So you have someone who can be dedicated to legal, or have someone be dedicated to another part of your function, and or even break down parts of your products. So you really build, I would say, technical depth and competence in the specific area that you're working on, which to me, I think allows you to be a better product manager once you have the time to really go deep and solve, I guess, more intricate or intimate product problems. So I'd say 1, so that's scope and ownership. 2, naturally, process and stakeholders become different when you're working at a company of 20 versus working at a company of 150,000. Your impact is much greater, but your risk is also a bit higher. And so there are stage gates in place that you now need to navigate that you might not have needed to navigate when you were a company of 10 or 20 and not really regulated and not in the media. And then, so I would say scope and ownership, and then process and impact would be how I think those 2, or how my career has really changed over time.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Sophia, probably love for you to sort of share your experiences, sort of owning the fellowship programs at StartMate and viewing those different PM roles, and then now at the Scale Up Canva. So I would love for you to share.
Yeah, I think Faiza, you covered kind of the main point. It's like generally the smaller the company, the more hats you wear, and the more general your role is, you will, and the bigger the impact that you could have. But I would also say that you can have that impact in a bigger company because you're working with, the things that you ship and that deliver affect more users. So that what impact means, that I guess that shifts. I think also, Harry, you touched on it earlier, it's not necessarily all about the size of the company, it's how long has that product within that company been around. So for example, at Canva, I'm in the creators team. This product has really only been about for 6 months. So there's a lot of like 0 to 1 things versus the established teams like the homepage, where your impact is like you're maybe moving features around on a page versus kind of building things from scratch. So I think if we're talking here about like where would you want to make your first career move, it's a balance. I think like you go to the bigger tech companies, you're probably going to have a more structured learning environment as well. They may have a grad program, they may have some sort of APM structured way of how you rotate around. But the earlier you go, the learning experience will be entirely different in that like you just got to do it. You just got to get stuck in and figure it out. So both are great for different ways. I also think it's great to have I feel very lucky to have been able to experience both sides, the small and the larger.
Yeah, and I think there's this common saying where, engineers code, designers design, and PMs really communicate. But what skills and qualities should aspiring product managers really learn and master? Sophia, I'd love for you to answer this one.
The biggest thing for me transitioning to product that I found as a product skill versus anywhere else is like communication and influence is so important. The one lever you actually cannot pull is work lots more hours, because like you can't do the designs, you can't do the code, you've got to rely on the rest of the team and the triad to actually go and do those things. And so like that for me has been a big shift. I'm used to work, go and grind and get it all done. So communication influence. I think one that is an interesting one to continually develop is something called product sense, where you kind of just get to grips with how products work, like what are common user flows, what are themes. And so like one thing that you could do to upskill here is like download a new app every week and like use it and play on it. What were the peaks, what were the troughs, what delighted you, what frustrated you, and then like keep doing that and figure out what those themes are. And so what that also develops is like your critical analysis, and that's good too. And then like thirdly, just this, we've touched on it, but like curiosity about the world. Like read broadly, don't necessarily just read like product 101 books. The best advice I actually got from someone is around this point, and he said the best book he ever read as a PM was around how the different prison systems were built in different countries across the world. And so that gives you the frameworks in your mind of how people come up with systems and create rules, and how that kind of way of thinking and frameworks in your mind, how that can relay onto product. Actually, it's really interesting because you can actually come at that problem with a completely new perspective. And so I love to read like things about different cultures, languages, religion, like science. I love like anything to do with like physics and the universe and anything like that. And actually by broadening your mind, you're able to solve problems more creatively.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think you can also find problems within intersections, and I think that's a really good point. And I think that leans really nicely into our next question, which is, I think there are a number of aspiring founders in our audience, and how can they sort of develop a product sense? Yeah, Harry.
Yeah, for sure. I think Sophia touched on the first one, which is, go out of your way to experience a whole bunch of different products. But when you pick up a product, software, physical, it doesn't matter. Use it critically and deliberately. Like, yeah, as Sophia said, think about those peaks and troughs. Try and imagine why something has been designed a particular way. So I think that's the first one. Second would be, to build that sort of product sense, think about your information diet. And again, Sophia nailed this, like you want to be a lateral horizontal thinker. You want to be taking inspiration from as many sources as you can. Like the great product managers don't just know software products, right? They think about user psychology, or they think about the importance of accessibility in design, or they think about how bias influences research. So the more the breadth that you can, get into that information diet, the better you're going to build that product sense. And then I think the third, we've plugged this a bunch, but it's a trap that product managers fall into, which is speak to other product people outside of your company. I was speaking to someone about this the other day. I think it's because there is no structured path into product, that most people don't have a cohort when they're sort of studying. So you land in a product company and you often don't know many other product managers. So it can become quite insular. Mm-hmm. So yeah, really taking an active sort of step to get to hear how other people are solving similar problems is probably the most efficient way to build up that product sense as well.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Minnow does, right? With the learning. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, wonderful. And yeah, Sophia, do you have anything to add? I know you mentioned your first point before, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, no, but I'm just doubling down on what Harry's saying is like, it's, yes, there are courses, Minnow, honestly, and we will keep plugging it, is that actually helped me land this product role for sure. And there's a bunch of other courses, can be quite expensive. I did Reforge as well, which was pretty good. But what's free is meeting people and reading. Like, I mean, you pay for a book or you pay for someone's coffee, but like you just, I personally get so much more out of that. Like think about it, they've had their career of like 10 years or whatever doing product or whatever it is. Like imagine just being able to have like an hour-long coffee and you can try and like get all the good bits of their past 10 years in a one-hour versus read a book which could take you a week. Like all about the shortcuts.
Yeah, nice. So I think also I'd love to learn, so how should sort of founders validate their MVPs quickly? And I think my sub question to that is, should they focus on speed, velocity, or direction? So I think that would be my sub question there. Yeah, Faiza, would you like to start with that one?
Sure. Can you repeat the sub question? Speed, velocity, or direction?
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I actually think validating the customer problem as quickly as possible would be my take. So that maybe in your sub question there would be speed. And the reason why I say that is like, I think if you think you're solving a customer problem, and there's a number of assumptions that you're making in this customer problem that exist, right? So like that people need it, that they'll buy it, that they'll download your app, that they'll use it 3 times a day, or they'll pay for a subscription, or whatever the case may be on the idea that you have. There is in that set of assumptions, one of the assumptions that's the riskiest, whether that's if they're willing to pay for it, or if they actually need it, or if this is going to be part of their routine, or if it's, something that they will actually need or use, or that they will be willing to switch to, given that the other alternatives that exist in the market. And so my advice would be, how do you validate your MVP quickly is finding what that riskiest assumption actually is, and finding the quickest possible way to test it. Because if you are able to find, number one, find the riskiest assumption, and 2, test it quickly, I think you'll get the most amount of rapid and iterative feedback that you need to actually change the way you think about the problem, or change the way you might design or tweak the solution that you have in your mind. And I think validating the problem and the right problem is often the hardest part. Designing the solution, I think, can be sometimes easier if you're solving the right problem. But Harry, maybe you have a more relevant example with your Minnow MVP.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. Yeah, I'm a strong believer, right, that you should be able to well, when we say validate, really, it's a fancy way of saying build confidence. Build confidence that the problem's real, that the thing you're going to do matters. And yeah, I'm a pretty big advocate that you should be able to build a pretty high degree of confidence without ever writing a line of code, or at least initially, because code's expensive. So yeah, it's about getting creative on how you can build that confidence. But Faiza, to your point, like the purpose of an MVP, really what you're trying to do is learn, and you're trying to learn the things that you don't know. So people often, might mistake the MVP for having to solve the entire product need end to end, where in reality, it's just customers aren't going to use that. They're not going to use an MVP in a world of fully polished products that have had billions of dollars invested to them. They're just not. So getting really clear on the one or two things you're trying to understand is pretty much the most important thing. And then getting creative on how you can go and understand those. So, often maybe you can send an email, or you can post something on a social network, or you can go and speak to a few people, or you can reason by analogy and look what other products are doing. But yeah, it's all about learning at that stage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my takeaway there would be speed, which is, something I'm going to work on as well. So I think this really leans nicely into the next question, which is, do you have any recommendations on online programs, courses, or any resources that students or young professionals can lean into if they are interested in a career in PM? And yeah, we might start with Sophia.
Minnow, of course. And then a newsletter I definitely recommend is Lenny's. It's like, I was going to drop a link because I've lost it now. But it's just, Lenny's newsletter is fantastic. They have there, I've dropped a link to one of them in particular around product career ladders. We touched on it before. But yeah, that's a good one. And then Reforge is great, but you'd want to be where your company's paying for it because it's expensive.
Yeah, and Harry, you can plug Minnow here as well.
I think we got the message across. But again, like I think, you want to go broad, and you want to find the medium that works for you. Like I pretty much can't sit down and read a book. I'm way too fidgety. So I crush through audiobooks, but mainly it's podcasts. So finding the 5 or 6 podcasts that you can subscribe to that you just have sort of feeding you each week, I think is the go. I do have a few, I'll post them just in the chat now. Like these are a bunch that I often find myself coming back to, and they're less about the craft of product management, but more stories around building something that solves a problem. And I think that's what you take the most inspiration from, because that's what you can draw the lessons out of. But yeah, I think find the medium that works for you, that you actually are going to come back to, go broad, and have a few that keeps it fresh.
Yeah, I'll certainly note that down. And from this conversation, it does seem like there is no linear track into PM. But, in retrospect, when you look back at your journey, what direction would you take now, and what would you do differently knowing what you know now? So we might start with Faiza.
Oh, geez, I was hoping for me to go last on this one, because when I was reflecting on this, what would I have done differently? I actually don't think I would have done a lot differently. I think I was really grateful to have the experiences that I had. And I think the thing I can probably do more of is learn more from people around me. I think our network is our biggest asset. As Sophia said, it's free. And this world of, free information, there's just so much on YouTube, and you could search and watch Udemy courses for hours, and sometimes that's overwhelming, but actually sometimes it's, if you go and quite focus, it really can help you upskill. I actually think the need for an MBA is almost completely unnecessary in this day and age, and that's just more of a personal opinion. I think everyone has access to the information that they need and the people that they need to talk to, and so I would have done more of that. And probably backed myself a bit more. Like, everyone has transferable skills. You don't need to be this cookie cutter person that has this certain number of experience to get into any role that you want, product or otherwise. And so know that, be confident in that, and then really be good at sort of advocating for yourself to get there. I know, personally speaking, women probably struggle with that, and I personally did as well. So I back myself a bit more, talk to a few more people, but really just have faith in the process.
Yeah, echo a lot of what Faiza said. The one thing I would do differently, particularly if I was looking to crack into PM, was just build something. Like, we're at this point now where there's almost no excuse, right? Whether it's a landing page, a blog, a newsletter, even like a publicly available Google workbook. Like, there's so many little problems that you could just grab and try and build something yourself for. And there's so many free tools to do this that, you know, even if you're solving a problem for 5 people, even your friends, it's enough to get a little bit of feedback and get a little bit of a sense of, oh, there's a few things I want to go and do. Which one should I do first? How am I going to pick the one that's important? Once I do the thing, how do I know if it worked? Like, it's so easy to just start doing this now. But yeah, if I was to start again, it would be pick something I'm sort of interested in on the side and try and solve it for even just myself or one other person, and use that as a way to get a bit of a sense.
Yeah, and Sophia, if you would like to share anything you would do differently, or yeah,
it's a hard one, because I didn't know that there was this whole startup and tech world 5 years ago. Like, I had never come across it, and so in many ways I'm like, I wish I'd known about that while I was at university, and maybe I could have been in the position I am 10 years ago versus here I am at 30. But then you've got to remind yourself that it's the journey, not the destination. It was all very fun getting here. But I think for me, maybe the things I wish my mindset had probably been a little bit different on when I was younger was having more confidence in not knowing, or being the new person, or asking questions and being curious versus feeling like I should know all the answers, or whatever that might be. And then the other thing is, I remember there was this moment, and I must have been 20, early 20s, and like it clicked in my mind that like intelligence is not fixed. Like, I grew up thinking like, you can be, you just are an A-star student, or you're an average B student, and that's kind of how it is. And it's not. Like, find something that actually you genuinely love doing and are passionate about, and spend your energies and time there. And there are no limits. Like, do not put limits on yourself. And I think, kind of touching on that imposter syndrome topic, Faiza, that you touched on, the best thing that you can do when you feel that is just do the work. Like, if you can just show up and do things and make progress, like, you're gonna move forward. And so how do you kind of not waste energy on these thoughts that actually, like, it's just wasted time? Like, how can you actually just go and do something, whether it's staring at a book or trying to like muddle through, and it's thinking about your kind of just trying to like think about things like one foot in front of the other. Running really helps me with this, like getting into long distance running. Like, literally don't, like, just think about one foot in front of the other versus like the major goal that you want to get to. I recommend Atomic Habits by James Clear as well for this kind of mindset too.
Yeah, we get that recommendation quite a bit, which is good, because also, like, I find myself really stuck in that like analysis paralysis stage, but really taking action does help a lot. So yeah, I think a final question before we do jump into Q&A is, how much time do you spend on the just ship it phase versus sort of reiterating and incorporating user feedback? So Harry, would you like to sort of share your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, this one, it's going to vary depending on the product you're on and the stage of product. So, if it's 0 to 1, you're doing something for the first time, you should be trying to ship like every single day. But that's not in opposition of getting customer feedback. Often you're working very closely with a group of customers, but because you're working on something fresh with no tech debt, you can work incredibly quickly. So you are shipping constantly. But, if you take that on the flip side and you're working on a product that has millions of users or tens of millions of users, you're not going to be able to move that quickly because the risk is so high, right? And there's times to be more considerate. But again, there's also phases in product, right? Like, you can't ship continuously forever. With everything you push out, you increase complexity, you increase tech debt, and you need to build in time to pay that down. Otherwise, you'll get to a point where you're too slow and bloated to sort of move forward at all. But if I was to throw a number out to try and be helpful, you're for a quarter, if a team's healthy, you're probably looking to be focused on shipping, creating new value, sort of, somewhere in the realm of 50 to 80% of the time, depending on the team and life stage. And then the rest is going to be made up with things like paying down tech debt, incidents, planning, and other ad hoc activities.
Yeah, very helpful. And Faiza, would you like to share your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think Carrie hit the nail on the head, and the fact that like the split really varies not only by the maturity of the product, but the maturity of the company. And so I would say, from my time at a startup where we were kind of pre-IPO, as Harry was saying, you're shipping all the time. You got to show the value. You got to show that you're doing this because investors are reading your pitch book. Versus, I think, in more mature companies, you're thinking more strategically about what you should be building and why, and if that aligns to the business and the business value and the future direction. And then you're spending a lot of time. Then you're shipping it as quickly as possible, and then spending a lot of time in like iterating and incorporating feedback, given that it's a new market, or it's the dynamic of the tech industry is changing and you need to change your lending criteria, or whatever the case may be. And so for me, I think the third category I would add to your question is like, I actually spend for me at the moment, spend the majority of my time figuring out what I'm building and why, and then the quickest amount of time sort of testing it and shipping it, and then the next biggest chunk is then iterating once we've shipped something.
Yeah, and Sophia,
I love that you've introduced this third dimension to this of like what I'm building and why. Like, never underestimate creating that space for thoughtfulness to actually also take a step back and go like, is this actually right to do this right now for our users in the business? Is there a better way, etc., etc.? So yeah, I definitely love that third paradigm to that. I mean, I don't have a scientific answer on what that split would be, but what I will say is I think shipping also builds trust with your users. Like especially if you're leading with transparency, if it's a new product, and you're kind of getting that feedback and making sure you're on the right way. And the other thing that I will say is like also ship your ideas too. What I mean by that is like socialize and communicate your thoughts a lot, because that's also like helping you to refine it faster and faster and faster. It builds relationships, it builds trust internally. So yeah, just be in that. And it's things like, you're running up a Google Doc of like what your strategy might be or what you're thinking you might do with this. Like, I love the phrase quick and dirty, like just get it out there. Like, it is so much better to have, multiple heads on it versus one.
Yeah, incredible. So I think we'll open the floor up for Q&A. So if the audience members want to sort of like add your names to your questions, you can, feel free to unmute your mics and ask. So we might start off with Zara's question. So Zara, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, hey, I'm trying to quickly find that screen again. And obviously I'm not going to find it very quickly. Oh no, got it. Hang on a sec. Mine was a bit basic, and I've heard so many different opinions about product ownership versus product management, and I just would love your opinion on whether they really differ and if it even matters.
I can jump in maybe with a quick answer, but I've never worked in an environment where there's product owners and product managers. For the most part, I think it's probably a bad thing, right? Like the more, at the end of the day, functions actually don't matter at all. You're trying to help customers and help the business. And I think sometimes people get too bogged down in, well, I'm an engineer and your product and your design, so let's all stay in our lane. All of those divides are much less important than what's the problem we're trying to solve and what skill sets do we need to be able to do it. So yeah, I don't see much meaning in the division. Yeah, that personal opinion.
At Canva, everyone just has the title of product manager, unless you're in a leadership position, you're managing teams. But like, whether you're like a grad entry level through to could have 10 years, you're a product manager. And I think Canva may be a little bit unique there in how they've managed to maintain that. But to me, it could possibly be a signal of two things. It's a bigger company. So that article I just dropped before, like there is clearer like career progression and hierarchy. So maybe it's a slightly more junior role. But I would be wary of like a smaller company having that title, because it just yeah, maybe it's suggesting. I don't know. I'll stop talking.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that I think in my experience, I've also never worked with a PO and a PM. To me, it is an indication of a company that is on their transformation journey to be more product led. and generally more tech enabled or like tech first. So an example, if Citibank has product owners, they're traditionally more an incumbent that hasn't had product managers or worked in an agile or scrum environment before. They might start off with having a product owner first and then transitioning eventually to a PM role. So to me it is an indication of just that stage in that transformation journey.
That's interesting. Thanks so much.
Great. So the next question is, how do you sort of effectively measure your development team's velocity and plan your sprints accordingly?
So I think measuring velocity, it's a trap people can fall into. Like at the end of the day, it's a hygiene measure. If you have a team that you trust and everyone's empowered, like you should be productive and there should be a sense of throughput. But if you're spending too much time looking at team development velocity and less time looking at the actual value metrics that you care about, I think it's the wrong perspective, right? So you should first look at, are we creating value each week? Are we continuing to deliver? And then if not, well, maybe is team velocity the problem? I think, often people fall in the trap of looking at it the other way around.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is oftentimes if the question then becomes looking at team velocity, if you've, as Harry said, you've identified that, we're not generally getting the value that we want or the output that we want, let's look at velocity. Sometimes I feel like that's a indication of incomplete product discovery. And so what I mean by that is, product hasn't done enough of the thinking of the what, the why, like the requirements that are needed, and had that, open discussion with engineering, at which point you're putting it in things into your sprint that actually truly aren't dev ready, which was potentially why your velocity isn't as efficient as you'd like. Might not be the only reason why your velocity might be down, but to me, it is an indication of like, if that's the case, it's generally because of me. So I just look at product first.
I just want to jump in there quickly and flag something that is like another marker of great PMs versus good PMs. The way that Faiza just jumped in and absorbed the blame. It's always a marker of really good PMs, in that you often absorb most of the blame, and sometimes there can be a lot of it, and celebrate the team. Side note, but I think it's
100%. 100%. That is, and I wouldn't say it's my job I would feel like I'm micromanaging by going in and like trying to measure that. It's like something else has gone wrong, which is, it's actually not on the development team. It's there's a question down there later about like what's like, I think, good and hard about being a PM. It's like you can't actually like directly do a lot of the work, and you can, but like you can't do the design and the engineer work, but like you're responsible for kind of all of it, but kind of not. Like it can be it's hard to juggle.
Yeah, seems like a real balancing act, managing expectations and then also absorbing the blame. We have a question from Kevin, so would you like to unmute and ask?
Yeah, sure thing. Just want to start off by saying thanks so much for spending time to share a bit about the product management in general and your experiences. Super appreciate it. I'd love to understand a bit more about how PMs such as yourself make more decisions in the organization you're working at. So how do you prioritize what to build, and how do you manage the trade-offs? From my understanding, there's different priorities such as business priorities or business levers that influence your decision making, or customer problems that influence your decision making. But I'd love to understand a bit more about what else influences it.
My go-to framework, and it is across the team, is the ICE framework, which is the impact it's going to have, the confidence that you can execute on it, and also ease of implementation. Like, is there stuff that you can already leverage, and like, how easy and painless will this be? And that's kind of what the decisions. Of course, on top of that is like user needs and business needs, and then it's like.
Yeah, I was going to say the same. Like there's millions of frameworks out there, and people can get incredibly scientific, but I always fall back and use ICE as well. You mentioned sort of making more decisions, I think, which is an interesting nuance. But I think one of the things you can do as a PM is share as much context as you can, and actually scale yourself out of having to make a lot of those decisions. Like the more that the team understands the customer and the problem and can make those decisions without you, the better a marker that is that you're doing your job as a PM. yeah, which might be a funny one, but the more that you can sort of spread those decisions, the better.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You want to get yourself out of that position as quickly as possible. The things I would add here are, I think, Sophia, you said something interesting about on top of that, there's sort of business needs and user needs. And in my experience, I actually would put user needs first and business needs second. So what I mean by that is, for us, at least in the companies I've worked for, you know, profitability and monetization comes later or comes second. It's more who are your users, what value and why, how are we going to provide them that value? And if you do that, monetization and profitability will eventually inevitably become a metric, but it is a secondary decision. But in making those sort of user first decisions, I think in addition to providing context, I think constraints are equally as important. So when we were going, public with the first company I was working at, making sure we could IPO was a very real constraint. And so that also influences what you're prioritizing, how quickly you can get things done to show value. And so context and constraints in line with the user problems is kind of my almost first high level triage. And then you kind of go into the ICE framework as Harry and Sophia mentioned.
Amazing, thank you so much.
Great, and I think we might have time for one last question. So I'll pass it to Shaman to ask his question.
Hi everyone, quick question here. So how would you recommend somebody go about getting from 0 to 1 with product as a discipline in, say, an established corporate that has, a defined way of doing things and its own kind of corporate culture?
I'm happy to kick it off. I'm not sure if I've done this, but the advice or the line I would take is like, and I do this for myself, like think of everything as product, in that it's something that's creating value for someone who has problems, and there's often ways to make it even better, right? So if you're in a big established corporate, what might that look like? And often it's some of the existing processes. So, if there's an opportunity to try and introduce some of that product thinking, I'd start with what are the systems or processes that are heavily used today and which people have opinions, and do you have the ability to influence, how you might improve that? And I think, that's a small step that's quite accessible, but is a way to start to inject some of that sort of modern product thinking.
Yeah, my advice here would be, and I think kind of Harry said it in his response earlier, is try to find something to build. And it doesn't need to be relevant to your role or to the company, but if you're like trying to change the way something is done, maybe take an example from an adjacent industry and do it on a side hustle or a side of desk, and then present it back to your manager and be like, hey, I know this is not the same thing, but look what I found. I think we could apply this to this, and it would have 10x value in growth, or reduce our cost savings, or the time to process. And having that sort of ability to show that you can think that way, but also then having data and evidence to prove it, I think it makes it much easier to build your business case internally when potentially you're not surrounded by that type of thinking all the time.
I think that's perfect. And I think also how that's received, that approach to your manager, whoever that is internally, if that is, because that's spot on, if that's negatively received, like long term, is that a culture fit for you? And if that's the kind of stuff that you get the energy from, where can your skills be better utilized in another organization? So I think it's good to absolutely experiment and try and drive that, which sounds like would be a lot of value. And if it's not well received, then that's a really excellent data point for yourself.
Yeah, so I think to end, Harry, would you perhaps like to share a link to your speaker library, or just talk more to that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's something we can share after if we've got everyone's emails. But yeah, as I said, I do some stuff on the side with a business called Minnow, which is sort of teaching people some of the product and strategy skills that are used and useful in most of the large sort of tech companies here in Australia. So yeah, I'll see if we can send around that link after this, and hopefully give you all a chance to hear from some of those sort of incredible leaders we've had, including our very own Faiza. Faiza makes a guest appearance and has been in the course as well before. So yeah, we'll get that shared around.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much to our panelists for coming today. I've certainly learned a lot from this session. It was very informative and insightful, so I really appreciate your time. And also to our audience members for really coming along and being really proactive and asking your questions, and it made it really an interactive session. So yeah, you can find Minnow, you can find Canva, and you can find Google on, you know, the respective company pages. And in regards to Textbook Ventures, we will be launching a few more events in the next few months. So you can find us on our socials and subscribe to our newsletter. Yeah, thank you everyone for coming tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much,
for
everyone.
organizing.
Thanks.
Sharing.